found tucked deep inside a locked cabinet marked Domestic Containment, Anomalous Pairings. The folder bore no name, no index number, no outward sign of its origin, only a date, April 12th, 1877. It was in every way an orphaned document. But on the fourth page, hidden beneath a tight crease, written in the distinctive ink of a long-deceased naval psychologist, were 11 words. They answered before the questions were asked. The folder should not exist, and perhaps it shouldn't have. The annex in which it was found had no record of construction. Its coordinates appeared just once handwritten on a courier's route map and then vanished forever from the Army's logistical grid. Erased, forgotten, but the contents unmistakably real. 2 psychological profiles eerily alike. 2 samples of handwriting mirror images down to the curl of each letter. 2 autopsy reports describing the same childhood injury. A single letter signed by both patients. Yet it carried only one name. Neither of them had served in the military. Neither had filed a census nor applied for medical assistance. Yet together, they spoke in perfect sync. They laughed at the same breath. And when the end finally came, they both answered to the same name. Their bodies were found 42 miles apart, but the time of death was identical. The cause unknown. If you're ready to take that first step into a case that science couldn't explain, stay with me. And hey, if you're enjoying this so far, consider subscribing to Sleepy History Tales. We're nearing our first big milestone, 1,000 Dreamers Thinkers and Midnight Historians. Your name could help us cross that line tonight. No pressure, of course. Just quiet curiosity. And if you're listening right now, tell me something small in the comments. What country are you in and what time is it? There's comfort in knowing you're not alone, that we're all scattered across timelines and time zones, watching the same mystery unfold together. This isn't folklore. This isn't science. This might be a memory that was never meant to split. In the forgotten archives beneath the now demolished East Arna Convalescent Home, a single patient intake questionnaire was found. Crumbling brittle near dust, yet still legible. At the very bottom, 2 separate handwritings, 2 different inks but one shared line. I remember the pond. The boards creaked. He fell through. I pulled him out. 2 forms, 2 different dates, 2 separate institutions, but the same sentence. On March 3rd, 1877, a field nurse named Ellen Whitlock filed a report with the Regional Physicians' Council. Her concern involved patient Farford 12, a man around 34, admitted under duress after an act of self-harm. She was assigned to conduct a standard intake memory test. Nothing diagnostic, merely a calibration exercise. She noted his words were fractured speech, disjointed, but his memories were vivid. He spoke of a dock on a farm, a frozen pond, a brother slipping through the ice, of waking night after night to blood on his hands. She marked it trauma stabilized. The case was closed. 12 days later, in another county, nurse Alice Keene filed a nearly identical slip. Her patient female, number 307B, had collapsed into catatonia during choir practice. When she finally spoke, her words were pristine. A childhood by the water, the exact dock, the worn red plank at its edge. Keene thought it harmless nostalgia until the woman began to draw the pond's reflection from memory. That image, now part of her medical file, was later compared to the drawing from patient Nashofer 12. They matched. Exactly. Neither nurse was ever contacted again. What caught attention instead was a clerical coincidence, a routine scan by a census intern at the Virginia Bureau of Statistics. While reviewing trauma-linked memory logs for end-of-year data, he flagged the two entries as SEQ overlap, a known error code used to catch duplicate submissions or military pension fraud. But what he found was not fraud. It was impossible. Two patients unrelated, unknown to each other, had given nearly identical life stories, with no motive, no shared location, no logical explanation. The intern escalated the discovery to the regional board, where a quiet, margin-annotating physician named Dr. Wesley Tarr took note. Next to their names, he scribbled a single word, looped. His later journal entries show growing unease, not just at the similarity of memory, but at the timeline. Patient number 412 gave his account on March 3rd, but patient 307B hadn't even been admitted yet. Dr. Tarr requested a full cross-examination of both patients' written statements. His request was denied. Undeterred, on April 2nd, he made handwritten copies of both statements and filed them himself in a sealed envelope marked quietly, "Case overlap." The sealed envelope from Dr. Wesley Tarr has never been recovered, but one letter written in his hand was found among his personal belongings after his passing. It reads, "They do not recall each other, but they remember, as if they were one." It's the paradox that still defies explanation. The original files show no biological link, no shared place of origin, no evidence that their paths had ever crossed. In fact, they were born over 80 miles apart, and yet their speech patterns, phrasing idioms, even the rhythm of their emotions, the way they pause, the way they soften or harden in tone, are mirrors of one another. At one point during a routine intake, patient 412 was shown a photograph of a farmhouse. It wasn't his. It belonged to 307B's recollections. Still without hesitation, he whispered, "That's where it happened. Before I had my name." That sentence was never entered into his official record. We only know of it because a nurse, her name redacted, kept a small leather diary. That page, decades later, surfaced in a private collection, water damaged but legible. She ended her entry with a single question, one that remains unanswered. If he wasn't the brother she saved, then who remembers it happening? And why do they both wake choking every time it rains? If this story has drawn you in, take a quiet moment to tap subscribe. At Sleepy History Tales, we're close to our first 1,000 Midnight Historians. Each one is a small candle in the dark, and maybe yours is the one that tips us over. Now let's continue. There is a thin folder, still preserved barely in the archives of St. Thaddeus Infirmary. Its paper edges are curled from mildew, its staples rusted, its contents eaten away by moths. Inside, 2 drawings, one signed by a male patient, one by a female. No notes, no interpretations, just one circle drawn by a hospital clerk at the corners where every line, every angle matched. He wrote only one word in pencil, identical. The male 412M had been transferred from a work camp after dissociative episodes began to interfere with labor. He answered questions only when they were mirrored back to him, often completing the doctor's sentences before they could finish. The term in his file was language predictivity, a common flag for feigned amnesia, a warning to watch for scripting rehearsed memory. But 412 didn't feel rehearsed. He grew visibly tense when asked about buildings. He broke into tremors when handed a stick of charcoal. Meanwhile, in a separate ward of Coalbridge, women's facility patient 307BF was silent on arrival. She spoke nothing, but her hands wouldn't stop drawing. Not landscapes, not faces, but floor plans. Her sketches were cold mathematical. Long symmetrical rooms, repeating patterns, windows perfectly scaled stairwells that spiraled endlessly downward. And at the center of every drawing, always the same element, a straight hallway leading nowhere. Some nurses joked, perhaps out of discomfort, that she was designing a cathedral for insects. But others didn't laugh. The symmetry was too exact, the dimensions too consistent. Shadows were placed correctly for light that didn't exist. The drawings were filed monthly and would have remained buried, separate, unexplored, if not for one man, Elijah Brom, an archivist with the Bureau of Civil Hospitals. While cataloging images for a data audit, Brame noticed something odd. 2 patients at different institutions had submitted house diagrams within 10 days of each other. He placed one over the other using tracing paper. The chimneys aligned. The slope of the roof was identical. Even the angle of shadow on the southern wall matched precisely. His first assumption? A misplaced training manual. But no architectural references could be found at either hospital, not in the shared libraries, not in intake files, not among staff materials. Brame flagged the drawings and sent them to the Department of Anomalous Diagnostics in Richmond. The file was returned, unopened, no signature. At St. Thaddeus, attending physician Dr. Horace Mickwell kept a private log of 412MA's strange utterances. In one entry, he wrote, "Patient does not identify the structure as imaginary. He refers to it as before the naming. When asked who built it, 400MAIM simply replied, 'We did.' When we were still deciding." Mickwell, not a man prone to drama, underlined the phrase "we were still deciding" several times. His margin notes suggest confusion at the tense, as though the grammar itself carried a contradiction. A few days later, 307BF was discovered standing at the end of her corridor, still, unmoving, for nearly 22 minutes. When approached by staff, she asked, "Have I already walked the other wing?" There was no other wing. St. Thaddeus and Coalbridge Women's shared nothing. No budget, no staff, not even the same contractors. And yet, a strange linguistic pattern began to surface. Both patients referred to the walls of their wards as the seam. Both called their meals first harvest. No metaphors, no symbolic language, just matching terms, private language, shared by 2 people who never met. Then came the third drawing, discovered accidentally tucked into the back pages of an unused intake log. No name, no date, no patient number, but the same house. This time, shown in cross-section. And in the hallway that always led nowhere, stood 2 figures, one at each end, facing inward, separated by a single dividing line. Neither had crossed. The hallway had no doors, only a seam. And in the margin of the sketch, drawn faintly in red pencil, someone had written, This is not where it began. This is where they met. Among the quiet stacks of misfiled medical records in the deaccessioned archives of the state hospital, one envelope has long escaped attention. There's no return address. The wax seal, brittle fractured, is flaked away at the edges. Inside, 2 sheets of aged parchment, both signed, both in graphite, both bearing the same name, Elias R. Farrow. But here's what makes that impossible. The signatures were made on the same day in 2 different counties by a man and a woman who had never met. The name triggered no alerts, no criminal record, no land title, no census listing under the Farrow surname in 1870. It wasn't the name itself that raised concern, but the signatures. Submitted by 2 patients at separate institutions, they weren't similar. They were indistinguishable. Letter spacing, angle of each loop, trailing pressure. Even the microscopic hesitation before the final W, each detail matched perfectly, confirmed by the Office of Legal Handwriting Verification. The anomaly wasn't caught by a doctor. It was first noticed by an unlikely figure, a junior intake clerk named Solomon Greaves. Greaves had a reputation not exactly loved by his co-workers for his obsessive cross-checking. He was known to re-verify carbon impressions weeks after forms had been finalized. On April 9th, he quietly submitted a memo under Form 17B Duplicate Identity Biological Disparity. His handwriting was neat, rigid, cautious. He noted that both subjects responded to the name as if they had always known it. The male hesitated before accepting the pen. The female asked for it before it was offered. Neither paused or blinked while reading the name aloud. Greaves included side-by-side rubbings of the signatures. He overlaid them with wax paper. A perfect match. His submission was logged by the Central Records Office in Richmond, then quietly vanished from the internal system within 6 days. The confirmation log was later recovered, but the routing code had been crossed out, and the word cleared was scribbled in ink not used by that department. It's moments like these that make stories like this feel wrong, unwelcome, like a truth that resists being told. If you've been following this far, you're already one of us, someone who listens between the lines. If you're not yet subscribed to Sleepy History Tales, maybe this is the moment to join our quiet archive of the unexplained. We're close now, just shy of 1,000 curious minds, each a flicker in the dark. Your name might be the one to open the next file. Now back to the name. The male patient referred to in documents as 41M refused to sign at first. "Give me a name," he said. The attending nurse offered him a blank form. He stared at it for 3 full minutes. Then, without hesitation, he wrote, Elias R. Farrow. The female 307BF wrote the exact same name. She did so while staring directly at the wall opposite her bed, never looking down, never blinking. Later, during a routine handwriting training at the Virginia School of Legal Medicine, forensic analyst Marianne Traz flagged the signature rubbings as part of a teaching exercise. She wrote notes in chalk across the board. But before class ended, they were erased. She never submitted a formal report. The name Elias R. Farrow doesn't appear anywhere in federal records before 1877. No marriage license, no property deed, no school enrollment, no tax form, nothing. Except one thing. The visitor logs at both institutions, St. Thaddeus and Coleridge Women's Facility, list the name Elias R. Farrow as having signed in to visit each patient alternating Sundays exactly 5 weeks apart. The signatures in the visitor books identical to the patient's, but neither patient was allowed visitors. And on the fourth Sunday, when staff expected the signature again, none appeared. Only a smudge, as if a pen had rested there too long, then vanished. At the corner of that log page, a night orderly scribbled a final note. They write as if the name came first, before either of them. There is one final document, forgotten. Wedged between birth tallies for livestock and tax assessments for fence repairs in a county ledger, no one has touched in over a century. A marriage certificate, dated July 6, 1872. 2 signatures, 1 seal. Its paper is thinner than standard parish issue. The ink has faded but remains readable. The names Elias are Pharaoh twice, once in a tight formal hand, once loose rounded. What disturbed the clerk who catalogued it in 1881 wasn't the name, but the fact that it appears twice in Virginia's record system, submitted 4 years apart by 2 different institutions over 100 miles apart. The document never changed. Same calligraphy, same county seal, same officiant, Reverend L.H. Mallory. But here's the thing, there is no record of a Reverend Mallory, no grave, no assignment, no entry in the regional church registry. His name returns blank in all baptismal and ordination records, and yet his signature curves with confidence. Not like a forgery, but like someone copying from memory they weren't supposed to have. The first appearance of the marriage certificate comes not from any county office, but tucked within the intake file of the female patient 307BF. It was attached to her registration form as proof of a prior legal name change. The attending physician made a note of it. He flagged the document as possibly outdated due to its rural formatting, but filed it anyway. No questions asked, no follow-up made. 2 years later, the same certificate appears again. Different patient, different ward, same paper. This time it's part of the intake file for patient 412 Memira the male. No request accompanied it. No memo. No staff member recalls placing it in the folder. Just the certificate slipped in quietly, as if it had always been there. It wasn't until 1897, during a routine redundancy audit, that both certificates were compared side by side by a registrar named Abraham Coulter. Coulter's notes in the margins of the audit log are minimal, but exact. Staining matches, creases identical. This is not a duplicate. This is a recurrence. He drew a hand grid to compare water damage and ink diffusion. The results were impossible. His final observations scribbled faintly beneath the grid. This document is not copied, it is reintroduced. Following protocol, Coulter was told to send both certificates to the Richmond Verification Office. According to institutional logs, they never arrived. What remains is a cropped and blurry microfilm image accidentally preserved by a junior technician while testing a faulty lens. In the copy, the bride's name is partially obscured, but the groom's name is still visible. Elias R. Pharaoh. The space for witnesses is left blank, and in the second version of the certificate, the word private is faintly handwritten in that same field. The listed address for the ceremony, Willow's End, a logging outpost known to have burned down 5 years before the earliest dated certificate. When shown the document during separate interviews, neither patient acknowledged the marriage, but both reacted with visible distress, not confusion. According to hospital notes, the female whispered, that wasn't the first time. She never clarified what first meant. On both certificates, the officiant's seal is nearly worn smooth. But under magnification, a phrase can still be read along the outer ring. By memory, made one. If you've made it this far in our story, you're different. You don't flinch when facts blur. You don't turn away when something doesn't fit. And maybe that's why you're meant to be here. We're just a breath away from 1,000 subscribers, and every voice helps uncover the next whisper lost to time. If you haven't yet considered joining our circle here at Sleepy History Tales, it's quiet, but it listens back. Let's return to the record, pinned to the final page of a now missing ward log from Coalbridge Women's Facility. Someone left behind a torn train receipt. The name at the top written in rushed pencil, Agnes R. Delane. Beneath it, beside the destination line, one word appears in a different hand, reassigned. Nurse Delane was no mystic. She was trained in Baltimore during the 1874 smallpox surge, known for her calm around patients in deep trauma. She could sit in silence for hours listening to those who could not speak. And yet, there is no official record of her transfer. On the morning of May 2nd, her name vanished from the staff list. Her room remained untouched for 3 weeks. Then quietly, her belongings were removed. No memo, no replacement announcement. What's stranger is what she left behind. A night log found years later in a stack of unsorted reports from St. Odell's receiving house contains Delane's final notes. 4 waking episodes between 2 hours a.m. and 4:30 a.m. Each entry brief, clinical, repetitive, sound of voice, female mimicking laughter. Patient 307BF, confirmed asleep. Heard whispering again. Words indistinct. Hallway clear. Sound now behind me. Room 3B unoccupied. Then, cadence identical to earlier vocalization, but deeper. Delane wrote that she did not raise alarm attributing the experience to exhaustion or hallway acoustics, but in the margin of the report she copied a line, what she believed she heard, whispered in full. I have never lived in her, only remembered. No other staff reported disturbances that night. The following morning, when asked why her suitcase was packed, Delane replied simply, I didn't pack it. It was found by the rear exit, neatly placed, her nursing badge pinned to the strap. Her transfer order wasn't issued by Coalbridge leadership, but from a Department of Health Affairs office in Petersburg, a division normally reserved for military hospital assignments. The form had no signature, only a stamped message. Urgent continuity required. She was reassigned to a federal hospital in York County. There, according to scarce records, she served without incident. No complaints, no disciplinary notes. And in late 1879, she resigned quietly. But a letter found decades later in the attic of her niece's home contains a final fragment of her memory from Coalbridge Ward. I have heard others echo before, but not ahead of me. Not from inside walls, not with my voice. 6 months after her departure, hospital records show a rise in staff rotation around room 3B, the room of patient 307BF. No reason given. After the incident with Nurse Delane, overnight nursing assignments in the upper corridor were suspended indefinitely. No announcement, no justification. Just a canvas barrier hastily erected, splitting the ward in two. No structural renovations were underway. And yet, patients from adjacent rooms were relocated to the South Annex. None had asked. None had spoken. Years later, a rediscovered floor plan of the ward shows something odd. Room 3B, where Delane last served, was slightly rotated. Not a drafting error, not a trick of perspective, but geometrically misaligned as if nudged off axis by unseen hands. Records claim the wall had been modified years earlier after a fire inspection. Yet, no documentation of any construction exists. Only one note appears in the blueprint's margin. Not typed, not signed. Just a few words in an unfamiliar hand. This room listens. At St. Thaddeus Infirmary, deep inside an unused dream inventory, a folded scrap of paper was found, torn from a patient's journal. The ink on the right side had run from water damage, but the final sentence, cramped in tight script, remained clear. When I surface, the face is not mine, but it knows I'm not drowning alone. The author, patient 412M. He had no record of sleep disturbances at admission. But over 3 nights in late May, his behavior shifted. He began to report visions, what he called the reflection drowning. The description was chilling in its simplicity. He stood in still water. No shore, no sky. Just a single ripple approaching. From beneath the surface, a figure emerged, his own reflection but inverted. It made no sound, no struggle. It simply opened its mouth and took in water, calmly, continuously. Meanwhile, at Coalbridge Women's Facility, another patient, 307BF, recorded a dream that same week. Watching myself submerged backwards as if unlearning how to breathe. Nurse Caro later noted that each morning, the patient traced her finger across the mirrored wash basin at her bedside, mouthing a word she refused to say aloud. The basin was later removed. It had cracked on its own. These dreams might have remained isolated, forgotten. But Dr. Wesley Tarr, reviewing institutional reports on language patterns in trauma patients, noticed something impossible. A single phrase appeared in both reports, in 2 different hands, 5 days apart. The second mouth opens first. Same punctuation, same words. No contact between patients. No shared texts. No access to media of any kind. Dr. Tarr submitted a formal anomaly report to the Regional Committee on Behavioral Echoes, a long-dormant body meant to assess mass trauma mimicry events during wars or mine collapses. The report was returned, unopened, stamped. Case already in progress. Puzzled, Tarr requested clarification from the Central Archive in Richmond. His request was denied, but 3 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared in his hospital mailbox. No seal, no return address. Inside, a typed dream transcript, undated, partially redacted. The title line read, Shared Recursion Event, ZO3, Primary Subjects Unknown. The transcript described the same setting. Still water. A submerged figure. The sense that breath was being reversed, taken back. Its final line, he breathes in what she forgets to drown. No one on staff admitted to preparing or delivering the file. Attempts to identify the typist via analysis came back inconclusive. Observational logs from both 307BF and 412M showed the same irregular eye movement patterns during sleep. Exactly mirrored. Exactly timed. It was as if in rest, they were watching. Or being watched. You've noticed by now these echoes aren't just coincidence. They're recursion. A kind of remembering through repetition. And if that kind of thing calls to you, you're already one of us. Sleepy History Tales is only a few breaths away from 1,000 subscribers, a shared threshold, a whispered landmark. If you're here still listening, you're part of the story now. And we'd be honored to have you join us on the other side of the veil. The medical records show that on 3 separate nights, both patients, 412 of MERS and 307 BF, experienced synchronized night terrors. Each incident occurred at precisely 3:17 a.m. In both wards, nurses on duty reported hearing splashes loud, unmistakable. But when they checked, there was no water, no spill, no leak. One nurse, visibly shaken, described the sound as like a basin falling in reverse. By then, Dr. Atal had grown increasingly withdrawn, more occupant than colleague in his own department. In his final ledger, before taking leave, he wrote, "If dreams are learned like language, then these two studied at the same school. But who was their teacher? And why do they dream from opposite sides of the same glass?" The last entry in 307 BF's journal, now faded and warped from water damage, shows a single hurried line scribbled in the margin. "I drown first, but he wakes wet." No trace of Ward C at Coalbridge Women's Facility remains. The West Wing was demolished in the winter of 1880, following an inspection that declared the rooms structurally unstable. Yet, hidden behind a foundation rot, report a hand-drawn blueprint survived. Its title written in black graphite. Mirror Immersion Trial, 307 BF. A single room is outlined in red. 4 walls, 8 mirrored panels, no windows, 1 observation slit. There is no official record of its construction. On June 4, 1877, patient 307 BF was transferred to this room for a method called environmental dissociation restructuring. The term does not exist in any known medical literature. Her physician, Dr. Leonhard Keene, described it as a way to interrupt cycles of internal visual recognition. The patient was not told she would be surrounded by mirrors. According to Keene's personal journal recovered years later from a cloth-bound notebook, the patient stood perfectly still for the first 41 minutes. She did not look around. Her eyes stayed fixed on her own reflection. There was no speech, no panic. But her pulse steadily rose, documented at 112 BPM by the second hour. Then, without warning, she began to hum, flat, monotone, unplaceable. Even the nurses couldn't name the melody. In the margin of his notebook, Keene wrote only one word: recognition. That same evening at St. Thaddeus Infirmary, nearly 100 miles away, patient 409 passed, awoke screaming from an otherwise calm sleep. The timing, later confirmed to match exactly when 307 BF began humming. His screams weren't aimless. 8 glass corners, no door. She sees them all, but none are hers. When handed a pencil to calm him, he drew a room, square, enclosed. A single slit at head height. The proportions perfectly matched the Coalbridge blueprint. He had never seen the room. In the days after 412M, began to mutter a phrase under his breath, phonetically transcribed in the ward log by nurse Emmeline Hargreaves. She described it as resembling Latin, but with no recognizable conjugation. When played for her retired Latin instructor, the cadence was said to evoke a reversed legal invocation. Back at Coalbridge inside the mirrored room, 307 BF continued to hum until the 3rd hour. Then, without speaking, she stepped forward and placed both hands on the central mirror. When staff entered, they found smudges, not handprints. They were curved, nearly circular, spaced closer together than human fingers allow. Her own hands were clean. Keene requested all mirrors be removed. His final letter to the ward administrator, salvaged in pieces from a burned box of correspondence, ends with this line: "We do not know what she saw, but it saw her in turn." And he described it without ever being told. Later, the drawing made by 412M was re-examined. Only when the page was inverted did they notice a faint penciled symbol in the corner. 2 ovals, one inside the other. 4 straight lines connecting them. It resembled an iris or a cell. Beneath it, barely visible, one watched, the other remembered. In the deep, mold-stained vaults of the Honrio County Registrar's office, tucked between brittle land petitions and forgotten parish maps, lies a fragile folio. Vital entries 1851-1860, parishes unverified. Whatever comes next begins there. Still with us. Good. These fragments, these echoing memories are forming a structure now. Not a house, not a prison. Something in between. If that kind of story finds you in the quiet hours, subscribe. You're already closer than you think. We're just a few names away from 1,000. And we remember everyone who stays. The folio was never meant to survive. Held together by string and rusted pins, its pages are swollen from age and mildew. Yet somehow, its first 30 pages remain legible. But on the 31st, everything begins to shift. The ink darkens. The handwriting changes mid-sentence. It's a standard birth entry dated August 19, 1853, for an infant listed as Elias R. Farrow. At first, it follows the expected format: township, birth date, mother's name, father's profession. The handwriting is precise, upright, and clerical, typical of county scribe Martha Withers, whose unmistakable pen graced the census rolls that same year. But just past the father's name, something goes wrong. The line hesitates, ink pressure increases, and then mid-stroke the handwriting shifts completely from tidy loops to severe angles. The text slants, left unfamiliar like a hand suddenly possessed. There is no correction, no scribe's initials, no reason given, but one thing doesn't fit. The listed parents, Matthew and Eliza Farrow, were both declared medically sterile in 1852. Their records are clear, filed at the local poorhouse infirmary. Following a final failed attempt to conceive, they are buried side by side in Grayson Hollow Cemetery. Their tombstones list no known children. The irregularity might have been forgotten if not for archivist Wendell Bray. While conducting a federal census audit, Bray flagged the Farrow entry and 4 others where the handwriting shifted midline. But only one had a margin mark, a strange symbol resembling a cart with a line through it. It doesn't appear in any 19th century scribe guide. Bray sent a sealed verification request to the Office of State Records in Richmond. It was returned unopened. A red wax pencil had marked it with 5 chilling words: "Document unratified, do not pursue." So he looked elsewhere. At the first parish of Ardell, Bray found a second record, a baptismal entry for Elias R. Farrow, this time listed vaguely as summer 1854. Unusual since all other entries on the page are dated precisely. The officiating clergyman's name had been erased. Beneath it, faint but legible, someone had written, "Baptized in duplicate." Meanwhile, 60 miles east in Cedar Run, a completely unrelated birth entry from 1855 added a new layer of mystery. It listed a female child born to an unwed mother, later placed into private foster care. Her name left blank. In the margin, a scribe wrote, "Name deferred until pattern clarifies." When transcribed into the 1860 state census, the child wasn't listed under live births. Instead, she appeared in a marginal section labeled Conditional Enumeration, a designation normally used for children in asylums or correctional care. There's no official link between the Cedar Run girl and Elias Pharaoh, but the handwriting on the second half of the Cedar Run form exactly matches the altered hand on the Pharaoh record. Same diagonal slant, same harsh R formation, same unfinished S loops. Years later, in 1889, long after both records had been sealed and filed, a forgotten division known as the Office of Non-Compliant Records issued Memo 743, an internal analyst report containing a single cryptic note. Parentage uncertain. Patient likely resulted from mirrored entry. No explanation follows. No one now knows what mirrored entry truly meant. Wendell Bray never published a final report. But in the lining of his desk drawer, investigators found a note in his own hand. If 2 children were written into being, then someone must have written first. But whose name came second? There was one last item, preserved between the pages of a discarded intake log from St. Thaddeus Infirmary staff, found a letter. By all administrative logic, it should not exist. No stamp, no return address, no seal, no recipient name, and yet the letter arrived. It was discovered at 4:05 a.m., placed atop the bed of patient 412 Minel. According to nurse's log entry, W114, no staff were on duty at that hour. No visitors had been registered, and the ward door was locked from the inside. The envelope blank, save for a single crease along its left edge, a fold style common only in government inter-office correspondence of the mid-1870s. No one ever claimed to have seen it delivered. We are now closer to something that cannot be unseen. What was written into these ledgers may not be just record. It may be structure, a mirrored system. And when one side records, the other remembers. If stories like this haunt your curiosity, the way they haunt ours, subscribe to Sleepy History Tales. We're approaching 1,000 names and we read each one, sometimes more than once. The letter was never sent. And yet, somehow, it arrived. It was written on muted beige stock, fibrous, stiff, almost brittle with time. A type of paper used exclusively by federal military hospitals between 1871 and 1876, reserved for internal psychiatric summaries. When held to sunlight, a watermark emerges. USMPU, Facility Use Only, United States, Military Psychiatric Unit. The letter is handwritten in thin, upright script, precisely spaced. No corrections. Though unsigned, it is written in the first person entirely in present tense. The voice is calm, clinical, but distinctly female. The ink is cadet blue, a pigment standard among field surgeons. Only one word in the entire letter is underlined. Still, a single excerpt reads, "I remember the sound before the question forms. He hears the question before I remember why I asked." there is no need to repeat. The answer is always behind me. Patient 400 told him, read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it precisely and placed it beneath his mattress. When questioned, he gave no verbal response, only began humming an atonal melody. It was the same melody previously recorded during the mirrored room observation of another patient, 307BF. Nurse Hargreaves transcribed it phonetically. It matched no known hymn, no folk tune, no regional lullaby. Gerard Knox, the facility's senior postmaster, conducted a full audit. All incoming and outgoing post for St. Thaddeus is routed through Midford Relay, 19 miles west. But this letter, no stamp, no postmark, no pressure indentations typical of mail handling. According to Knox's log, no such letter ever passed through the system. Administrator Dorian Fett issued a private memo. Envelope has no wax, no adhesive, no seal, no flap residue. Yet fiber compression suggests it remained closed at least 48 hours. Paper is chemically older than ink. The mystery deepened at Coalbridge Women's Facility, where patient 307BF had been transferred. Her personal journal recovered from the effects bin contained a page dated 2 days before the letter arrived. It was mostly blank, except for one line, written vertically along the page's margin. He will read this exactly once. The paper was identical in stock to the letter. Both showed the faint grid impressions of a military guideboard, a tool never used in civilian hospitals, but neither patient had military records. Neither had family employed by the state. A week later, behind a storage unit near the infirmary's back exit, staff found a discarded shipping manifest. It listed 1 box, MPU notepads, Grafton Army Hospital surplus, status undelivered, date May 1875. Both patients, however, were not admitted until early 1877. The watermark on the letter paper dates the stock to winter quarter 1875, part of a batch that by all accounts was destroyed in a federal paper pulping process 2 years prior. The final line of the letter is written in a different hand. Larger, darker, uneven. I did not send this. He found it before I wrote it. There's one more anomaly. On the last page of Dr. Peter Luring's personnel file, a scribbled footnote appears. June 17, 1877, resigned. The word resigned is underlined twice. The reason for his resignation is not medical, not disciplinary. Instead, beneath a faint erasure, the original note is still visible. Found record that had not occurred. The record in question was discovered misfiled beneath a stack of dental forms in the West Wing Records vault. It lacked a cover sheet, only a handwritten label in black wax pencil. Preliminary postmortem. Ferro X Dvi. It was unsigned, unsealed, stamped with the initials MRI, for internal use only. This abbreviation doesn't appear in any federal archive until at least 1880. Inside the folder were 2 autopsy reports. The patients were identified by name. Elias R. Farao. One entry redacted to initials only. Each form contained detailed medical data. Height, blood type, cranial, and spinal notes. But where distinct organs were expected, something was wrong. 1 brain, 1 larynx, 1 lung anomaly shared between the 2 names. Near the center of the second form, a typed note had been underlined in red ink. Vocal function singular, not bifurcated. Dr. Luring, trained in forensic pathology, flagged the document as a procedural error. But the deeper he read, the clearer it became. These were not mistakes. These were anticipations. One field listed cause of death as separation event unobserved, and more disturbingly, both autopsy forms recorded times of death that had not yet occurred. The time stamps: 10:47 a.m., July 9th, 1877. At the time the folder was discovered, it was still June, and once again in the lower margins of both reports, the handwriting shifts halfway through, just like the Pharaoh birth record, just like the Cedar Run entry, just like the forgotten baptism. There is a pattern here. But it is not linear. It is layered, folded upon itself like voices overlapping in silence. And sometimes what has not yet happened leaves the clearest trace. The ink changed. At first, light brown, almost translucent. Then halfway down the page, it darkened to near black. The pressure deepened. The strokes became more deliberate, like a hand growing more certain or more afraid. One entry reads, "Subject B exhibits no incision, but the cavity is voided. Fluid traces do not match type." Disturbed Dr. Loring removed the forms and forwarded them to the Richmond Medical Review Office, attaching a personal letter requesting verification of the autopsy's authorship. 6 days later, the envelope returned, unopened. No explanation. The forms were never spoken of again. In a later journal entry now held at the Virginia Historical Archive, Loring described the moment of understanding with surgical detachment. He did not use the words forgery. He did not suggest fabrication. He used only one term, a temporal misfiling. For weeks, Loring kept the originals locked inside his desk drawer. He couldn't decide whether to destroy them or duplicate them. One night while making rounds, he returned to his office. The drawer was open, the lock untouched, the folder gone. Only a single corner of one page remained torn during filing. On the reverse side, under blue light, there was an imprint, not written but pressed into the paper by hand. It read, "One death is memory. The other is rehearsal." The official logbook of St. Thaddeus Infirmary for July 10th, 1877 is blank. It is the only empty day in 3 years of continuous record keeping. No meal entries, no medications, no staff rotations, no incidents logged. At the center of the page, a single dry ink blot, as if a pen had been lifted mid-word and never returned. Beneath it, faint under lamplight, lies the ghost of an unfinished signature. It begins with the letter F. The final log entry for patient 412M was the morning of July 9th, observed in calm state. Refused food. Repeated previous phrase, "No more left to forget." There is no entry after that. No discharge. No transfer. No formal closure. His bed was reissued to a new patient 12 days later with no paperwork. At Coleridge Women's Facility, something identical occurred the same day. Patient 307BF disappeared from the rotation log. Her name wasn't removed, just faintly struck through in red chalk, a marking usually reserved for the deceased, awaiting transport. Yet, no record of her body exists. Her cell inspected days later was untouched. Her gown folded, her comb in place, a small slip of cotton paper tucked beneath the sink tile. The paper was blank, but at its center was a deep indentation, thumb-shaped as if pressed too long by a hand that could not let go. Nurse Geraldine Foster, who had worked shifts for both patients during administrative overflow, later gave a verbal statement off record to a physician at her next post. Though never officially transcribed, it was quoted second-hand in a disciplinary review over unrelated absences. According to that file, she came in early to check the meal list, and their names weren't there, not crossed out, just missing, as if they'd never been written in. She checked back 3 weeks. Same result. When she asked the ward clerk, she was told, no inquiries permitted on those files. External directive. That directive came in the form of a sealed memo distributed to both facilities by a liaison office at Fort Belvoir. The memo was marked Confidential Record 36A. No copies were kept. No digital scans. It was never archived in any institutional record. But one carbon copy resurfaced years later, returned by mistake to the State Sanitarium in Radford. The memo contained a single paragraph and a list of storage container serials. Its final line, records concerning subjects 36A and 36B are no longer under local jurisdiction. Compliance required. Retain no duplicates. That morning, witnesses at both facilities noted the arrival of a black lacquered wagon military issue, but unmarked. It remained no more than 22 minutes. 2 men in plain coats, signed no slips, left. No names. They removed 2 wooden boxes, both labeled only with branding, ERF. 1 of 2, ERF. 2 of 2. One nurse remarked that while the second box was smaller, it felt heavier. When questioned, she clarified, I only lifted one, but I couldn't tell if the weight came from paper or from what was missing. From that day forward in both institutions, the paper trail stutters. Meal counts go off by 2. Laundry manifests return with 2 extra gowns. Patient logs contain unexplained gaps. A maintenance record at Coalbridge reports a drain blockage near Ward A. No one opened the pipe. No one filed a repair. We tell ourselves, history is permanent, that the page holds still once written. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe some records rewrite themselves, not from ink, but from pressure, from something remembering its own future. They were not discharged, they were withdrawn from reality. A piece of cloth, unsourced, unclassified, was pulled from a drain pipe. It was simply recorded as cloth unclassified. Years later, during a digitization of historical records on the mentally ill, a volunteer stumbled upon a missing record from the 1877 census. The record number was there, but the patient's name was blank. Only the location was recorded, double entry unknown. The comment written in faded pencil was a single line. They were not discharged. They were withdrawn. In 1901, as military post offices across the East were being dismantled, a clerk found an envelope in an abandoned post office near Suffolk, Virginia. The envelope was bound with linen string with no address, no postmark, no sender. There was only a faint embossed stamp on the paper U.S. Quartermaster, Railroad Distribution Unit. The stamp indicated that the envelope had been sealed no later than 1878. Inside was a sheet of drawing paper, folded in half with no writing or ink, just 2 faces sketched in pencil, one on each side. There was no signature, but on the edge of the paper, there was a faint imprint, RBW, matching the diary of Reuben B. Whitlow, a courier for the Richmond Mental Transfer Service from 1875-1878. Whitlow died quietly, never having risen above the lowest rank. His records were later destroyed in the post office fire of 1883. But the strangeness did not end there. One face, two people. One memory, two directions. The faces were drawn with unusual detail. The woman's small jaw, her lips parted as if in thought. The man stares straight ahead, his shoulders stiff. But when the paper is held up to the light, something surprising emerges. The two faces are more than just symmetrical. They share the same pair of eyes, an identical set of eyes perfectly aligned, without deviation, without distortion, as if a gaze were duplicated, mirrored on both sides. The drawing never made it into the official archives. It remained in the archivist's personal possession until his death in 1929. His daughter later returned it to the Virginia State Library as part of a box of oddities. It wasn't until decades later, during the digitization process, that an archivist discovered a faint note in the crease between the two faces, arrived separately left together, mirror-like expressions. Synchronized heartbeats, one speaking for both. On the back of the envelope is a logistics note, Transfer Group 87E. Two files, dual priority. The phrase dual manifest does not appear in any military or medical records of the time. However, another unsigned document found at Radford Transfer Station also records Group 87E with the cryptic caption, "Subject shows mirror reaction. One speaks for both. Heart rate synchronized." Reuben Whitlow's last recorded delivery, dated June 29, 1877, ends with the line, "Held for observation, not yet departed, no destination, no subsequent delivery. One body, two facing directions. One memory, split in two." A diary entry believed to be Whitlow's, found in a train handbook, reads, "They sat side by side, but did not speak. One held the other's hand, but neither looked down. I offered water. They refused. But only one shook his head." Below is an unfinished sketch. Two figures facing opposite directions, sharing a spine, with the caption, "One body, split in two." The original drawing is now in a flat, climate-controlled storage box at the State Library. But what is most haunting is not the line, not the source. It is the fact that neither face is fully turned toward the viewer. They seem to be turned away, as if listening to something behind the paper, not a sketch from real life, but from memory. A memory. Split in two. Who was drawn first, no one remembers. But they both remember each other. In the crease where the eyes meet is a faint line, visible only when the paper is tilted. He misses her. She misses him. But no one remembers who was drawn first. The story doesn't end there. In a mislabeled file book at the Westfield Mental Asylum, which closed in 1882, a lone military memorandum was discovered. The paper was yellowed and brittle, bearing the circular seal of the Office of the U.S. Medical Examiner. If you've made it this far, ask yourself, how many more records have been yanked from history instead of forgotten? What do you think really happened to them? Leave a comment below. Sleepy History Tales reads every response, and if you find what's told here to be not to be remembered, then perhaps you should subscribe to the channel before it gets retired again. The journey to 1,000 subscribers is approaching, and you're part of the story that's not over yet. There were documents that did not fade, but not because they had been preserved, but because they were timeless. The note was typewritten, undated senderless, departmentalized, and completely devoid of distribution lists unusual for any military medical document. The ink was still dark, unaltered by time. Chemical analysis showed no aging, no tannins, no oxidation, as if it had been typed recently, but by a machine that no longer existed. The subject line in all caps was cold and cryptic. Program Cognitive Division, Twin Division. The content was brief, but dry and difficult to decipher. It described the classification of a strange case. Two separate individuals who exhibited synchronized behavior and neural activity beyond the threshold of coincidence. The language was technical, far-fetched, containing phrases that had no place in standard medical practice. Symmetrical recall, synchronized preconscious deviation, no definition, no explanation. Only one final directive: do not isolate until response latency has been quantified. Maintain a minimum distance of 40 miles. Classify under Level 3 observation, continuous horizontal study. No such program was ever recognized. No department ever existed. In any public records from 1865 to 1900, there is no unit called the Cognitive Division. There is no trace of a program called Twin Subdivisions. The phrase never appears in any military or civilian medical records or even in the 1937 Congressional Review of the Abandoned Psychiatric Programs. There was only one clue: the code number in the upper right corner, TS33B. It matched a short-term project that had been stored in the Fort Miller Archives in Northern Virginia. That building had burned down in a controlled medical clearance in 1909. Someone had read the file, and he never wanted to read it again. The TS33 case file was one of the few documents taken away before the fire. The man assigned to handle it, Lieutenant Harland Decrow. But he never completed the assignment. His resignation letter, kept in a folder labeled Personnel Changes, said simply, "I have read it once. Cannot read it again." The pages seem new but speak in a voice that is too old. Lieutenant Decrow was then sent to a remote outpost in Montana. He died in 1915. The cause, unknown. A memo that was written by no one, received by no one, and signed by no one. But it was there and could not be erased from memory. The document was found decades later in a mislabeled file box tucked between applications for extra blankets for the Women's Wing Department C. How it got there, never explained. When the forensic team tried to determine the age of the ink, they expected signs of tannin decay, but there was nothing. Under a microscope, the ink reflected light unusually, as if printed under a fluctuating temperature. One analyst commented, "The ink appears to have been melted at the base. The pigments do not react with oxidation." That statement was struck from the final archive as speculative. But at the bottom of the page, where the signer's name would normally be, there was only a blank line. No rank, no name, no designation. Only when viewed from the side does one see a faint indentation, without ink, as if made by a finger pressing lightly. Enlarged, mirrored, this indentation forms a strange conjunction. ERF. Not typed, not written, but remembered. January 4th, 1877. A seemingly ordinary day. But two identical deaths were recorded within 5 minutes of each other on opposite ends of the state. At St. Thaddeus Hospital patient. Foron 12M was reported sleeping peacefully in the middle of the night. At 4:15 a.m., the nurse found him still lying there, his hand hanging over the edge of the bed as if he were about to turn over. No twitching, no signs of breathing, no movement. 42 miles away, at the Coalbridge Female Institution, patient 307 PF was found at the same time sitting upright in his bed. Eyes closed, hands neatly placed on the blanket. There was a faint red mark around her neck, not a bruise, but a friction mark, as if her hand had been around her neck multiple times. The nurse's final note read, "Patient appears to have settled herself," as if she was expecting something. Neither side called the coroner. No specific cause of death. Just natural. Both bodies were rushed by orders from the Richmond facility superintendent's office, not the hospital director. And perhaps the deaths were just part of an unfinished cycle. The embalming at St. Thaddeus was left to Silas Merton, a freelancer hired to handle overflow cases. In his supplies notebook, Merton wrote in the margin, "Cool but not decomposed. No rigor mortis. Prepare to cut sternum to drain chest cavity. Tissue resists. Knife won't enter. No cuts, but fluid drains. Close without incision." His assistant confirmed no smell of embalming. No incisions. There are documents that don't need to be written in ink, just remembered. And once remembered, they don't go away. If you're still here, you've probably read too deep. But if so, you're part of the journey too. Don't forget to leave a comment. What do you think ERF is? Or is it just an imaginary link created by the past that refuses to sleep? And if you haven't subscribed to Sleepy History Tales, now is the time. Be the one to see before it's all erased from collective memory. The file pulled from the air duct was simply recorded as fibercloth unclassified. Years later, during a digitization of historical mental health records, a volunteer discovered a missing entry in the 1877 census register. The record number was still there, but the patient's name was blank. All that remained was the location. The source of the double data was unknown. The record was discarded, and in the notes column in faint pencil was the line, "P. raps from someone who had read too much, not discharged." It was withdrawn. In 1901, during the consolidation of abandoned post offices across the East, a clerk discovered an envelope wrapped in twine at a military post office near Suffolk, Virginia. There was no address, no sender, no stamp. Only the faint seal U.S. Quartermaster Rail Dispatch Division, dated no later than 1878. Inside a sheet of sketch paper folded in half, no ink, no writing, just two faces drawn in pencil, one on each side. Though unsigned, the edge of the paper is lightly engraved, RBW, matching the diary of Reuben B. Whitlow, transporter of documents for the Richmond Asylum Transfer Authority from 1875 to 1878. Although Whitlow died quietly, the sketches he left behind are distinctly human. The woman's face has a fine jawline, lips parted as if speaking. The man's stern eyes staring straight ahead. But when the paper is held up to the light, something strange emerges. The two faces share the same anatomical structure. The pupils are a terrifying match, as if the gaze of one person is perfectly mirrored. And most disturbing, neither looks directly at the viewer. Both of them turn their heads halfway, as if listening to something behind the painter. After the keeper of the sketch died in 1929, his daughter returned the original to the Virginia State Library. While digitizing it, a specialist noticed a faint line written in the fold. Arrived separately, left the same. There was no patient's name, but the back of the envelope read, "Transfer Batch 87E Dual Manifest Joint Priority." The phrase Dual manifest does not exist in medical or military records of the time. At the Radford transfer station, the only inventory record of the shipment was the line. Subjects presented mirror reaction. One spoke for both. Pulse synchronized. Whitlow's last delivery dated June 29, 1877, simply read, "Hold for observation, not yet departed." No location, no update. The diary ended there. Another diary entry signed R.W. describes, "They sat side by side, not speaking. One held the other's hand, but neither looked down. I offered water. They refused. Only one shook his head. Below was a rough sketch, two faces facing each other sharing a spine. The title, One Body Apart. The most haunting thing about the drawing was not the perfect line, but this: no one could remember who had been drawn first. And between the eyes that overlapped, the final pencil mark read, he remembered her. She remembered him. Another old military document found in the cluttered files from Camp Westfield bore the title, Program Cognitive Division, Twin Subdivergence. The brief, vague language mirrored recall, shared preconscious deviation. Orders: do not isolate unless response delay can be quantified. Keep at least 40 miles apart. Classification: Tier 3, Lateral Continuity Studies. No public records mention this program. Case number TS33B matches a project that burned down in 1909. The first officer in charge, Lieutenant Harland Decrow, resigned after viewing the only case. His resignation letter read, "I have read the case once. Cannot read it again. The pages are like new, but the story is too old." He was later sent to Montana, where he died in 1915 of unknown cause. One of the two mysterious deaths occurred at 4:19 a.m. January 4, 1877, and was reported at St. Thaddeus and Coleridge Women's Facility, 42 miles apart. No injuries, no resistance, no investigation. But in the middle of the head doctor's personal notes was an unmarked time card. On shift 4:19, out 4:19, Department Echo. On the back, written in graphite, "We ended together. We had to." We were the same breath, just taken in twice. An unnumbered file buried among old survey maps bore the name Pharaoh Eleazar, plus deleted. No date. No medical records. Just a handwritten, unsigned psychological assessment. We knew each other before we were told we should know. We don't remember meeting, only separating. The closing line in the middle of the page. We never shared a mind. We were what remained when one was split. In 1948, at a conference on differential psychology, Dr. Halrek Voss mentioned ERF, twin process, unfiled mind, 1877. He once said, "The difference is not one or two, but whether the memory is continued or interrupted." They are not two identical people. They are two thoughts that follow each other. The final document is now preserved in an acid-free envelope, unnumbered. No files, no official archives. But under the last fold, there is a scribble in another hand. We will not do this again. If this story makes you cringe, ask yourself how many names were left blank on purpose. How many records were not lost, but withdrawn? Who do you think they are? Are they one or two, or something else entirely? Sleepy History Tales is approaching 1,000 subscribers, and if you feel like these stories need to be told, subscribe, comment, and share before someone folds this page. We are Sleepy History Tales, and some records are never read again.